Well, hello there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. Savvy Painter is the podcast for painters who know that mastering your craft is a lifelong venture. They understand that the hardest part is showing up every day, whether they're inspired or not, and that we're all in this together. For the past 3 years, the Savvy Painter podcast has been sharing tips and techniques that you can use every day in your studio. And when you join the Savvy Painter email list now, you get a collection of inspiring quotes and practical advice collected from years of Savvy Painter interviews. Just go to savvypainter.com/subscribe to sign up for weekly emails and get your free PDF, Essential Tips for Artists. Each week, I interview established artists like Anne Gale, Scott Connery, Rebecca Crowell, and many other artists who are willing to open their studio doors, share their painting processes, and talk candidly about what it takes to consistently grow your skills. We get into the nitty-gritty of their daily studio practice, what tricks they play on themselves to avoid getting caught up in perfectionism, how to use flashcards as reminders to stay on track during long painting sessions, and other cool tactics to quiet the inner critic and continue moving towards excellence. The Savvy Painter podcast is filled with artists who generously share their stories, and by sharing their stories, they show the rest of us that we are not alone. So join us with the Savvy Painter email list and get even more connected with weekly emails. Sign up now and you get essential tips for artists, the inspiring quotes and practical advice collected from years of Savvy Painter interviews. Go to savvypainter.com/subscribe. It's that easy. My guest this week is the artist Marie Thiebault. Marie creates large-scale oil paintings to address the tension of urban landscape and the natural world. Her work tends to be a response to traumatic events in the landscape. She started exploring these ruptured landscapes, which typically have some type of natural disaster or plane crash, when she was in grad school. Marie made a substantial series about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that's when imagery and abstraction started to create this really interesting hybrid space in her work. Marie uses her work to confront these issues and record them and sort of start a healing process. Marie received her BFA in painting from Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA from UC Berkeley. She is currently a professor of art at Cal State University Long Beach, where she teaches painting and color theory. Here is Marie Thiebault. Marie, thank you so much for being on the Savvy Painter podcast. I am delighted to talk to you today.
Nice to meet you, too. I'm happy to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your work. What is it that inspires you to pick a subject matter?
Okay, I've been painting for a very long time, ever since high school, so over 30 years. And I've always been attracted to the landscape and to the history of landscape painting, American landscape painting. And I've always been, of course, concerned with the environment and changes in the environment, which have gotten pretty drastic increasingly over my lifetime. So instead of just a pastoral picture, I've been responding to traumatic events in the landscape as a way to kind of confront it or deal with it or let it into my heart or heal it or record it in some way. So I've always done these ruptured landscapes that have had some type of either a disaster or a plane crash or explosion all the way through grad school. More recently, I did a substantial series about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And that's when imagery and abstraction started to create this interesting hybrid space in my work. And I was using specific images from the photographs of the aftermath and piecing together fragments into a whole. So after that, I followed it with just responding to news events or certain cataclysmic visual things that would happen in the landscape, like the aftermath of the tsunami or the Deepwater Horizon event. All of those things led to certain paintings. And right now, I'm responding to the immediate environment and the changes I see in the immediate environment of the Port of Los Angeles. I'm using structures from the industrial landscape as well as the natural landscape and the huge oceanic expanse of the horizon line, the sea life, the birds, and the ships. And I'm trying to create a sense that they are reflective and contained within each other, that nature and culture are contained within each other, and that it's a precarious situation. So that's just the beginning of it, but it kind of led up to where I'm at now.
Did you start out as like before grad school, were you interested in sort of like the traditional California landscape painting, or did you always kind of tend towards an abstraction of that?
Well, the main thing is that I'm from New England. I'm from Connecticut, and I grew up with an East Coast point of view. And I went to an art high school, which had a collection of American landscape paintings. And so really like the Ashcan school and, very early, seaport paintings and so on. So these are the paintings that I grew up with. Being close to New York, I also went into New York frequently and got to see a lot of master paintings. So after going to Rhode Island School of Design, which is in Providence, I then moved to San Francisco. And then I was more influenced by California painting. And that was one of the reasons I moved there. I did love the work of Marie Thiebault, and actually Elmer Bischoff and Joan Brown were my teachers at Berkeley.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had some amazing teachers on the East Coast that were connected to, the Hans Hofmann and just the first generation abstract expressionists. Their students were my teachers. So that's why I've been teaching my whole life too, because I feel like it's this connection to this whole history of painting really in this country. So, but I did like California painting. That was one of the reasons I think I wanted to move to the West Coast too.
And the weather, I'm sure.
Yeah, and the weather. Although now it's not that much fun.
No, it's not right now. It's terrible. I was looking at some of your work and I'm so fascinated with the ideas of sort of chaos and order that you're playing with. And I know I don't know, it can almost be like a cliche thing to say for an artist that they want to play with chaos and order. And yet there's so much that can be done with it. And I'm really fascinated with your interpretation of it. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how that plays into your work?
Yeah, it's pretty complex. I mean, earlier I would say order and chaos went hand in hand in the process of the painting as well as in the idea of the subject, the concept of the subject. What is orderly? What is chaotic? What is the force that is switching, one state to another? So it's about flux and change and collapse and rejuvenation. Those are parts of it too. I was recently in a show, The Feminine Sublime, and the sublime is a lot about that immersion in the overwhelming sense of chaos or instability and being able to be still and co-participate with it rather than conquer it or ignore it. So it's a way of being sort of a witness to it also, and that's a feminine point of view of the sublime, which we're just starting to talk about and write about, and that was one of the things that show addressed. And there will be a link to a video that I'll send that maybe you can post that people can see that explains that, and it shows all the work in the show.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is connected to the concept of the sublime, but it's also connected to just the rhythms of nature, that things collapse and they get built up. And what I'm trying to do is always find this sense of teetering that is just about to go one way or another. There's a point of balance. Not that I want resolution and balance, because I like it to keep moving and have a lot of tension, a lot of space, both deep space and flat space, and a lot of choices for the viewer. But I'm interested in finding some balance so that when you observe the painting, when you're with the painting, it connects to a stillness also. So there is a balance in there.
When people look at your work, what is it that you hope that they will take away or feel or experience from standing in front of one of your paintings?
Again, something like that, where they would take in this sort of spectacular, complex scene, but they would also get stabilized by, oh, I recognize that's a horizon line. There's illumination that is from, it's a lot of light that are seduce you to look in different ways and try to analyze some of the forms. So there's a lot of light and mood and atmosphere that I'm dealing with. So that evokes memory and, I think, experience of the viewer in the actual landscape or in an imagined or a landscape that could even be archetypal. But I also want them to be able to get sort of, Joseph Campbell would say, aesthetic arrest. I always tell my students that, where that you're arrested by some or a group of structures or colors that you really can't stop looking, that you keep looking. Part of that is the pattern and the space and the repetition and the unfolding of forms through time and space. So space and time are the same thing. And by creating unfolding forms, I try to get a sense of time for the viewer so they can spend time within it, pulling up their own recollections and understanding sort of the choreograph intention of the space, like how I want them to read it, sequencing the space with time as well.
Can you give us a glimpse into what happens in your studio? So when you're constructing one of these paintings, can you kind of walk us through, like, the people who listen to this show are artists. And so we all love to geek out on this stuff and like want to know, what kind of paint do you use and how do you how do you determine your canvas size and where do you get your imagery from? So would you mind like walking us through sort of like a typical, you come into your studio and you're about to start a new painting, what happens?
Well, there's very few days where I started a new painting because I layer painting on top of painting on top of painting. And I have 10 paintings going at once, usually. So I do a layer, then I'll move to the next one and do a layer. And I'll wait to see what the painting suggests. And when I'm doing really well, I see visions on the paintings, what they need immediately. And so I hurry to get those down. So I try to get through 2 or 3 canvases. Like they're really big. Some of them are 70, 80 inches. So like one will say, I need a big green square that's going to become a flag right there. So I'll go and I'll mix it up and put it. And then if I see any more signs, no, then I'll go to the next one. So it's really waiting for the vision to come. A lot of that vision is from my research. I look at all kinds of photographs and my desktop is filled with folders. Like I'm looking right now, high seas, plastic gyred, James Ensor, the shroud, the ships. I have files of source material. So I'll just sit and look at those and I'll go, oh, I love that. And it will start to get my imagination going. And also I have a very vigorous drawing process, which is like collage. So if the painting is not going well, and it's not really talking to me, or I'm like stressed, like I have to finish it, then I'll just work on drawings until the painting sort of clarifies in my mind. So I do a lot of collage, and that's just free form. I cut, I rip, I paint with color, and I have stacks and stacks of drawings that some are unfinished and some are finished. And that helps me to resolve or even invent some of the forms I'm going to be working with.
It sounds like so much fun.
It is fun, but it's not always fun.
I want to ask you, what do you do when you're stuck? But I feel like part of the answer to that was in what you just said. But do you do anything different when do you ever feel that way or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, totally. I always feel like that. It's cyclical. But if you've been painting for a long time, the only way to get unstuck is to stay there, to show up in the studio and just go through the motions. In fact, I just had several shows and then I had good reviews and one that wasn't so great and it made me stuck. this spring, and it took until August for me to get into the groove again. But I just, you have to have a lot of faith that it's going to happen, and you believe that, you're going to figure it out, and then eventually it fades away and you're doing just fine again. But yeah, you get stuck. It's a part of it, right? So
Yeah,
the
it
main
is.
thing, it
It's
is.
a
And so,
frustrating part of it, but yes.
yeah, but you can't really, you just have to stay working. And many artists will say that, like Elizabeth Murray said that. And a lot of artists with the creative process, you just go through the motions so that when it does come through, you're ready for it. You have to be in place, ready for it to come. And it is a way of relaxing the brain. You just go through the motions.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of, what I was thinking of when you were saying that was it sort of reminds me of an athlete that in an off season, they may not be competing, but they're still training and they're still sort of going through the motions.
Right.
I think for artists, a lot of times we have this myth, I guess, or whatever, that the muse is going to come tap us on our shoulder and that we are going to suddenly go into our studios and just paint masterpiece after masterpiece. And I know intellectually most artists know that that's not true, but they still, when you go through that cycle that you just described, they still feel that sense of, what am I, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way?
Right. And when you're young, like you're starting off, I mean, I teach college. I've been teaching for a long time. And so this is what happens. You've never seen this experience before, or you've never seen it to that degree. But after you see it 50 to 100 times, like I have, it's no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not going to scare you. You just have to be patient. It's like, what do they call it? The doldrums, in the ocean. It's just like you got to wait for the wind to kick up. But, you got to be in the boat too, or you're not going to get moving.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of artists who are sort of in the, what would I call it? Not necessarily beginning stage. I think there's cycles in our development as well. So you can be an artist who's been painting for a very long time and still sort of go through this sense of, okay, I've built up all these skills. I'm a technically good painter. I have been painting, these things that up until now have sort of fulfilled my curiosity as an artist. And now I want to say more with the vocabulary that I have. And at the same time, there's sort of a resistance to creating work that is either subtly or overtly, I guess, political, but it's not always political. It's just like making a statement other than this is something I think is pretty. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's one type of transformation. I mean, there's a lot of ways to stay curious and experiment. Some people will need to, expand process-wise, and some people need to deepen their content and to make it more meaningful for their own investment, and I always ask myself, what do I want to say? What am I, I'm dialoguing with contemporary painters. There's a lot of people that are not looking at painting, but there are people that are looking at painting. And one collector who I've never met, but I admire because I know about her background, and she lives far away, and she just bought this giant painting of mine because she knows about American, landscape painting and art history. And I thought, wow, I communicated to her to a degree, even though we've never met, that she invested in this painting and she is living with it. And so I paint for them, the people that actually get levels of meaning from looking at painting and understanding painting. And if they can find it in my painting, that's what I strive for. That's hugely rewarding. So it is also common now with my students and with younger artists to want to be more political and to be more direct with content. And it was like that for me too earlier in my life. And I think they should. I think they should just don't feel boxed in by anything. Even Philip Guston had a series where he was making really political paintings, and then they went back to personal again. That's fine. It's fine to have two different types of painting going on.
Do you have two different types of painting going on?
No, not right now. No. I mean, sometimes I'll have like shows that will be theme shows and they're overlapping, and I'll try to like finish one up while another thing is bubbling, it's on the back burner, and that's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really hard. So I try to get just each piece to be as authentic and clear as I can and not worry so much about if it fits in with any external description or prescription. I want it to be evolving in its own way, and keep the integrity as high as I can. That's not always the easiest thing to do, because when you have to be productive, sometimes you think, oh, I could just do this, this, and this, and resolve this painting right away because I know how to do it. But I want the painting to have its own edgy mystery to it.
Do you struggle to maintain that presence? It sounds like it's a presence that you need to have while you're creating the work, to not just take that temptation of like, I could finish this really fast by doing X, Y, and Z, because you have a certain facility.
It's more like a moral commitment. It's more like a conviction, because I have already done that. I've already finished paintings for 2 shows that I had to finish quickly because I had a really heavy work schedule, and they are not good paintings. So I've kind of promised myself I'm not going to do that anymore. I mean, it's a couple of them are, but most of them are a little unfinished. They just don't have the density. And so I look at those now and I go, I am not interested at all in those paintings. But the ones that were hard won, that I just nurtured from little seeds all the way through the hard teenager years, whatever,
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's so funny because it cracks me up what you just said, because I will say that to myself about my own paintings as if they're somehow children that need to grow up and mature. And you're like, okay, this one's just having a temper tantrum or whatever, and we need to like rein this guy in or whatever. And so it's really funny to hear you articulate it the same way.
Yeah, but if the investment's worth it.
Yeah. And those ones that you kind of pushed to that next level, that you didn't just stop where it was kind of easy to stop, are, like you said, the most fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This might be a difficult question to answer, but I'm curious, like, what do you think the role of painting is today?
Oh boy, that's a good one for me. Well, I'm reading interesting essays in a catalog on a show called Chaos and Awe, AWE. It's in Nashville right now. And it's a very really good painters in it, and some virtual work. But it describes what painting can do in a way that hasn't been talked about in maybe 15 years or 20 years. So I'm really excited about it. I can't really summarize it or articulate it, but it just reinforces my own beliefs about painting, because there is also a very big pull from like a lot of contemporary artists to work with multi-mediums, to work with sculpture and painting and various materials and installation. And even all the grad students most of the grad students, they just don't stay with painting. They work in whatever medium they feel is going to get their message across. And I appreciate that. And I understand that, but I don't do that, because I think painting does something else. And part of what it does is it has this portal or this perimeter where you're able to, and it's the picture plane by and large. And so you're able to fall into the picture plane, and at the same time, you're expanding beyond the picture plane. So within its limitations, your imagination can go into great places, basically oceanic expanses, or it can come back to the surface. There's so much that can happen because of the limitations of it. There's many things I like about painting: the co-presence of being in front of it and feeling it. And when I go to a museum, I can feel it very intensely, co-present with not only the object, but the maker of the object. And I can get transported through history, even with the sense of touch of that. There's so many things. Surface, there's so many things about it, that the fact that it's humble, the fact that it's handmade, that it's sensual. There's so many things about it, I think, that very few other mediums do. It does something specifically that other mediums can't do. So if you find you can speak in that medium, then, that's great. But it's also so kind of slow, mysterious, hard to do, that not a lot of people do it. It's not quick, it's very laborious. It's hard work.
Yeah.
It's hard work. And that's another thing. It's like manual labor. Like, I feel like my whole life I've been covered in paint, like at the grindstone, mixing these colors and these dirty clothes in the studio. And my husband comes in and I'm like, yes, I know, I look like that again.
Your hair is like the-
I know, it's like every day, you're not feeling very beautiful, I mean, it's very grungy.
It is. I'm laughing so hard because I know. Like that feeling, like my husband comes home and I'm just like, I mean, like he does manual labor too. So I guess like it's good. We both just kind of look at each other and like, yeah, looking nice.
Yeah, I know. But, it is manual labor. It certainly is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What are some of the more memorable reactions that you've had to your work?
Well, I mean, again, it goes all the way back, but I told you about certain collectors who actually understand the work enough to want to live with it. And I've had art dealers that have done that truly understand the work. And I find that to be really a sign of success if I can communicate. And then, like getting into Berkeley and then having a show in San Francisco and working on just becoming my work being seen by a larger and larger audience over the years, to me, is a sign of success. And having been critically reviewed last spring, I had a show. Well, was it 2017? No, what's this? 17? Yeah, 2017. This is 18. Yeah, I had a show in Germany, and that was like a wonderful experience, and it was really affirmative for me. And, meeting artists from around the world that you can communicate with, that's really great. So just steadily building, and it's never like what you want it to be, but it is enough to sustain you. And so, yeah, I think that's all been favorable.
What have been some of the more challenging periods, or like if you have an example of an experience that you've had that was particularly challenging, but what did you take away from that experience?
Yeah, I would say because I thought about that question. There were like three things that have occurred. One is when there is negative critical reviews, and that shuts a lot of people down. It would shut me down for about 2 or 3 months. And how to get out of that and get your self-confidence back. That just takes time and spiritual work and drawing and just going through the motion. Another one is physically. What if you weren't physically able to do the work? Like I got into a car accident where I lost the use of my right arm. It was I had to stop painting. It was so painful. It was for almost 2 years.
Wow.
But I started to learn how to paint in a different way with paper and just without using a knife or anything and that healed up, but it was a challenge it was heartbreaking. I had to completely change the way I painted. And then another thing was being a mother and a full-time professor. I adopted my son from Ukraine. He was Russian speaking. It was crazy. I was older and I had the full teaching load, and I was trying to raise this 4-year-old. And I thought I could do it all, but I think the state of exhaustion then was so intense that I think my work suffered, but I still kept working. I still kept working. But now that I can look back and I think of the clarity I have now, even though I'm older, I'm like, there's so much more space in my life that my work is stronger and it is coming through without that fog. Another thing too is when you lose someone, a dear person and the grieving process is a huge impact on your creative process. And I've been talking with friends about that. Like if you lose a really dear person, there's no way to make that go faster. Some people can paint through it and make that the healing process. But for me, it's not as easy. So those are things that happen in life. And you have to realize that you're not a machine. You're a human being. You have to like go through this particular road right now, whatever it is, and trust that somehow you're going to get your full powers back someday, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's cycles to life, and some of them are really, really tough, like losing somebody who's dear to you. That is soul crushing.
Yeah.
And giving yourself the grace to understand that you're a whole human being and not just an artist, that there's other facets to you, and that there are times when those facets need attention so that Marie, the artist, can continue to work later on.
Yeah. And even now, like the political climate that we're living in is soul crushing for many of us. And there's so many people like, what can you do? So we have this discussion all the time. Make direct political work if that's what you feel you should do. Put something beautiful in the world if that's what you feel you should do. You know, like you have to keep making stuff and being positive and creating, but it seems inconsequential if you look at, if you take the whole big picture in. So that's like an existential crisis that we're all dealing with right now. Right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's like, what is the point of this? Like, I'm like dropping water into this area trying to make an ocean, and it's just not, it's so overwhelming that you feel like what you're doing doesn't make a dent in what needs to be done. But I think when you kind of, to use the filmmaker metaphor, if you kind of pull the camera back and look, that there's a lot of little trickling coming in from all sources, all the artists are adding their little bits to this, and it's becoming a river and a lake and eventually an ocean, and that, like what we do matters.
Yeah, it does matter because it's a lifestyle and it's also a community. We're all a community. So we make each other strong, just things like this or things we read when we visit, when we go to galleries, talk with artists. Together, that's like a community of people that are working with positive. It's not the only thing you can do. I mean, times like this may require that you do other things also. Mm-hmm. That you write letters or you volunteer, you do other things because it's needed. But to keep your creative practice alive and well, I think is also very important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so hard to talk about that and not just be like, oh.
I know. It's a dark hole. You can go down a rabbit hole really quick if you want.
Yeah, I mean, and if you go too far down, then it's kind of hard to see the light at the top.
I know.
I guess what I'm wondering along those lines is, and realizing that you have touched on this in previous answers, but I had to ask this with that. It sounds kind of horrible to say, but like, what is the difference you feel like your art is making? Like, do you see this act of creating work that is directly about the world we live in? And, I mean, you're dealing with so many different topics. I know you've gone from starting out kind of working with natural disasters, and now feels like it's kind of moving into what I would call man-made disasters. Like global warming and ocean waste and all of these things that are happening that, if I'm totally honest, when I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, what do I do?
Right. Well, I mean, there's some thinking about that in the Anthropocene that, things have changed irreparably, and we have to come to terms with that. And so what the thinking now is that we have to recalibrate where we are in the world and just consider that we are one species among species, that we have to be more aware, that observing and understanding that these dualities are present and they're really, really incredibly stark. The duality of, on the one hand, having this industrial complex that it can, all of that continues to create global warming and culture of war and so on. And on the other hand, you have threatened ecosystems all over the world. And these things are at odds, but they're also together. They're like the world we're in. And this is what I'm painting about now. Like, look, you see this and you see this, and you're in it. This is a part of it. It's like a moment in time. So it isn't so much like, wow, this is a terrible thing and I'm reporting on it, like a commemorative painting, which I think that's that mind state that I had several years ago. Like, I'm commemorating this event with some kind of respect. I'm commemorating this event. But now I see it like, this is a montage of what I see. This is surreal. This is this beautiful thing, this beautiful color and light and sun and natural form. And this is the weight of this other structure. And I'm trying to like reconcile it kind of incomprehensible what we're dealing with right now. So I'm trying to build up these contrasts so that, again, they're in balance and they're teetering and nothing's really overwhelming something else. So it's a hybrid form.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm trying to think of that as like an offering, as just really like, this is kind of about the way it is right now. This is addressing this. So it's not so much that painting has ever or can ever have direct, immediate impact in the world. I mean, maybe it does here and there. Maybe Picasso did. And, I think some paintings have had direct, but I don't think most painting does. So you're painting for the future, you're painting for the past. It's like a timeless thing. You're painting for people who understand that fluidity of time too. So it's not so much it's a direct effect on what's happening now. That's how I think about it, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like I don't know. I'm sure at any point in time, there's people life is chaos in a way. There's always something. And to be able to look for, find, or create the sublime in the middle of that, I think is something worthwhile and meaningful.
Yeah, or to be able to tolerate it, to actually take it in. Where instead of look away or be asleep or, to actually like keep your eyes open and pull in that much chaos. I mean, I guess there's a little bit of Buddhism in there too, that it's sort of being with that terrible state and then just realizing that you're a part of it. And that within that, there's also beauty. There's an incredible amount of beauty. There's a lot of contradictions and paradoxes. There's a lot of paradoxes in the complexity of the world that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, I think that, in a way, our role as artists in some regard is to sort of remind people that that we are complex, that we human beings are complex, we're messy, and we're capable of seeing or believing two opposing ideas at the same time, or standing in the middle of this and seeing absolute chaos and, the horror of things that are happening throughout the world. And yet still finding the beauty in it. Right.
And painting is a way of making it whole. Like for a long time, I would say, that I think all this chaos, we started off talking about order and chaos, and it's a way of making it whole. It holds it together in a composition. So it's in flux. It could change at any minute. It could become better. It could become worse. And also, yeah, we are complex as artists, and every artist has one particular individual point of view about that complexity. That's why, each artist is contributing to our human understanding of what our potential is, what our consciousness is at this point, Everybody has something to offer that is distinct. And I think that's the role of the artist, is to find out what they can say, like, what a poet can say, what a musician, what is that distinct voice. And it's a gift. If you can do that, I think it's a gift to humanity. It's a humble gift. It's not like really big deal. It's not going to fix anything, but it's a gift. It can shift things. I think art can shift the consciousness, especially if you are connected to a community that's discussing ideas and it trickles through,
Yeah. I like that. And, I was just about to ask you another question. I'm like, I don't know. I think we can just end on that very beautifully said, hopeful view of what our role is and what we can contribute when, sometimes it feels a little overwhelming.
Yeah. So time to get back to the studio, right?
Marie, that was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Savvy Painter podcast with the artist Marie Thiebault. Thank you so much to Marie for joining us and sharing your story. Go to savvypainter.com and click on the podcast tab. You will find show notes there, examples of Marie's work, and links to connect with her. I have been working hard to bring you tips and techniques to help you out in your studio, in-depth interviews with artists like Marie who are courageous enough to share their stories. And by sharing their stories, they show the rest of us that we are not alone. Big or small, your contribution matters. So once again, I would love to give a big thank you and a shout out of gratitude to some very special people. Thank you so much, Ruth Kalb, Carolyn Green, Jane Denman, Woven Art, Lisa Matera, Shirley Williams, Ronald Chavez, Kristen Cronick, Suzanne Vince, Eric Abel, Andrew Curran, Hannah Lake, Corin Salajka, Debbie Bird, Gail Root, Mary Dolan, Barry Koplowitz, Simon Austin, Gail Height, Gina Saharas, Sandra Burschel, Shirley Williams, Leslie Gerhardt, Art of Joy, Victoria Eisenberg, Teresa Hill, Colleen White, Julie Snidel, Cynthia Fuller, Jamie Kirkland, Sylvia Bailey, Alexis Redden, Kenneth Burke, Jim Ciarez, The Roaring Artist, and Deb Anderson. I am so grateful for your support. You keep this podcast going and help other artists make a big impact. Big or small, your contribution matters. Thank you so much. So until the next time, this is Ann Treesewood with the Savvy Painter podcast. Thank you so much for listening.